Hi, I'm Greg. Welcome to Affect Studio. I want to talk about the new liquid profiling function for the Kemper, and specifically about adding it or retrofitting it, as Kemper call it, to existing profiles. This will be interesting to most of us who have plenty of profiles that could benefit from more authentic EQ controls. Kemper's existing generic EQ is similar to the EQ in some amps, but never exactly the same. In a lot of cases, it's very different. Sometimes it's better and more useful, but I regularly find myself missing the specific EQ from the original amps. A lot of amps, particularly vintage designs, have unique and sometimes very interactive EQ, which is a big part of the sound and response of those amps. Liquid profiling replaces their generic EQ model with models of the tone stacks from various common amps to get you closer to the sound and feel of the original amp. For existing profiles, Kemper have a process that lets you retrofit a liquid profile so the gain and the EQ settings you see on the Kemper match what was on the real amp when originally profiled. It will then calibrate the EQ values to match those settings. So if your bass was on 4 and the treble was on 6 on the amp, rather than staying with the default setting of everything in the middle, it now knows the bass was set to 4 and the treble on 6 and adjusts accordingly. Let me show you. Adding a liquid tone stack is really quite simple. I've got my bassman profile loaded, so I hold down the amplifier button till a parameter page comes up. Now I hold down these 3 buttons, which all say restore, restore gain, restore amp model, restore EQ, and this puts me onto the page. Now I'm going to go for the Vibrolux Bright as the option for the amp tone stack. See how that goes. The volume was on 8.5, so I'm going to set this here as a reference thing for them. Not that it seems to have actually match up to what's happened. Then go back a page, and the treble was on 7. And the bass was on 4.5. Now it's also got presence control, which is on 4, which it doesn't have, but we'll forgive them for that for the moment. Then I press burn, and it says long press, so you hold that until new settings burned. Then I go in here, press store, entire rig, store as, and I've now stored my liquid profile. Let's see how it sounds. So looking over at Rig Manager, you can see this is the original bassman that we used, and here is a liquid profile version. Now you can see that the gain knob changes completely, but down here it says generic gain, and that will be exactly the same as what it was. And then the bass and treble controls now match what we told it to match. Now, the important thing, of course, is how do they compare. So here, so they sound exactly the same to me, which is great. That's a good start. So then I can go in here and adjust the treble, and it's more like the amp. I can increase the bass. Whereas if I go back and use the generic controls I had, they're not bad, but in this case, not that different. So that's one situation where there may not be a huge difference or huge advantage, but it's still quite interesting to actually compare them, and I certainly like the idea of having other controls. Now, another one that's interesting to try is a Vox AC30. As a long-time Vox user, I can tell you that the Vox controls are very interactive, and that the Kemper controls are nothing like the tone controls on a Vox. So once again, I've got the AC30 profile loaded into the Kemper. I press the amplifier button till the parameter page comes up. Now I press the 3 buttons here. Doesn't seem to change anything, but apparently it is. And then I'm going to go through and find AC30 top boost. Now the gain on the Vox was on 5. And I'm going to go back a page. Bass was on 7. treble was on 6, and cut was on 6. So back to the other page, burn, long press, settings burnt, once again store, entire rig, store as. Let's see how that compares. Okay, so going back over to Rig Manager, I've got the original profile that I started with. And then the one we just made with the liquid profiling. Once again, you see the controls change. But the sound is the same. Now, if I change the controls on a Vox, now I can do this quite radically here. Not a sound I particularly like, but they're very interactive controls. Now if I try the same thing with the generic controls here, it's very different. There's a lot more mid-range. So if I pull the mid-range down, no, it's just the presence. Now it's not as painful, but of course just for the demo here. So you can hear there with the Vox, it's quite a nasal sound when you turn them both up because they're so interactive. It's such a different tone. But you still get the same sort of idea with the other amps too, just they're not as savage in their ability to shape the tone. But my initial feelings are this is superb and a great addition to the functionality of the unit. The Kemper has always felt more like a real amp than anything else I've tried, and this brings it even closer again. I've never used the phrase game changer, and I'm still not going to, but I'm almost tempted in this case. And you can of course try different tone stacks, what was on the original amp, mix and match. I've already enjoyed doing that with the generic tone stack with things like my Tweed Champ profiles, which of course have just a volume control. I'll go back and try the different Fender tone stacks on the Bassman profile to see how they compare, see if any of those actually sound better and even closer to the Bassman. That's all quite easy to do now. So that's how you add the new tone stacks to existing profiles. Very simple and effective, and I'm certainly already sold. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.